The goals in this investigation are first to understand how air pressure changes horizontally as a weather system travels. And so when we talk about air pressure changing, typically we talk about it changing vertically. As you rise in the atmosphere, air pressure declines. But for this module, we're going to talk about the horizontal changes in air pressure. And specifically how they relate to weather systems such as cold fronts. Then the second thing we're going to do in this example, or in this investigation, is we're going to talk about what are called meteograms, and I'll show you how to read them, and they're not that bad. And then finally, using a meteogram and the weather data plotted on it, we're going to then talk about how to identify the passage of a cold front. One of the things I'll say before moving ahead is that this particular investigation does a really good job of walking you through the process of identifying a frontal passage. With that said, the first few questions of the application section build on investigation 4, and then investigations 4A and 4B. So you're going to see things about advection again. You're going to see things about rotation around high and low pressure systems and how that relates to warm and cold air advection. So definitely make sure that you're still a little aware of what was covered in investigation 4A and 4B. And if you do that, you should be just fine. Okay, so the very first diagram that they show on this particular investigation is this diagram right here. And so here's what's going on. You have two high pressure systems, both marked with these H's, and to be honest with you, typically in the wonderful world of weather, we usually denote high pressure with a blue H. So I don't know why this one's labeled red, but just it's a high pressure system. And the idea is how is air pressure changing as you're traveling from one location to another in the setup? Well, if you recall from a few investigations ago, if I recall this was investigation 2A, as you depart a high pressure system, like this one right here, your pressure should be declining. You should be getting lower pressure and lower pressure and lower pressure. Now at some point, you're going to be approaching the second high pressure system, and so your air pressure would be going up. Now with that said, in between these two high pressure systems, we have this blue line here. It's more like a dark blue, purplish line. And you notice this spike here. This actually indicates a cold front. And cold fronts actually represent an area of lowest pressure. So this area right here is basically a low pressure. And in fact, I'll even pull out my handy dandy pin here. And this is a low pressure right there. And so the idea is that as this front is moving, and typically these fronts move in the same direction that the spike is pointed in, so this front is moving in this direction. Let's say I was located here. I'll draw myself here next to the thing that says warm air. Let's say I am right over here. Well, what's actually happening is, and there's my little smiley face, there we go. And what's actually happening is this cold front is approaching me. And as the cold front approaches me, pressure should decline. And then once the cold front arrives and then passes, pressure will then begin to increase as this high pressure system over here is now approaching me. So that's the first thing you really notice with the frontal passage is prior to the front passing, pressure declines. Then once the front has passed, pressure then goes back up. The other thing that you'll notice when a front passes is depending on the type of front, and really for today's activity, we're only going to deal with cold fronts. And they're typically the most blatant, so typically what happens, and in fact more than typically, what happens is ahead of the front, so I'm still ahead of the front has not reached me yet, I'm in a layer of warm air. Well, what happens is as this cold front approaches, it pushes the warm air out of the way and moves cold air in. So what's actually going to happen is once this cold front passes me, the warm air will have been pushed away, and now I will be in an area of cold air. And so really, a few telltale signs for identifying a frontal passage are a sudden decrease, bottoming out, and then increase in air pressure, and a sudden, sometimes even sharp, decrease in air temperature. And I'll actually show this to you in a few minutes when I show you a mediogram.